Recording in progress.
Hi, good afternoon to everyone. Let us just begin the conference. Dear all, welcome to the Innovation in Higher Education Conference, a conference that I anticipate will be of great interest to all parties involved. This conference focuses on high-impact trends and factors in global and European higher education. This year's theme is Higher Education, the New Normal, and the Role of Digital Teaching and Learning. And we will be concerned with crucial and key issues that need to be the topics of our everyday agendas. It's clear that technology is now widely accepted as a normal part of university education, both by students and teachers. In most universities, lecture halls are now equipped with screens and voice recording, and the new educational and pedagogical approaches are tried out and implemented. This conference, again organized face-to-face and partly hybrid, will allow participants to keep track with the following vital aspects, topics and projects such as the following. 1, the corona crisis, which has brought up more than ever, the discussion of the importance of synchronous hybrid education, blended education, and online and distance education. As you know, in this arena, we are launching the Digital Pro project on November 18th. Number two, micro-credentials and its upcoming policies and practices. As you know, I-HE2021 is taking a leadership position in Europe with respect to modular continuing higher education by means of, among other things, its collaborative work with the European MOOC Consortium in order to develop the common micro-credential framework combining both academic and professional orientation. As we know, the Microbull project has produced a report on the use of the Bologna tools to facilitate the integration of micro-credentials into the Bologna process. The aim is to gain consensus in Europe for a definition of micro-credentials where the use of the Bologna tools is key. Again, I-HE2021 is playing an important role in micro-credential expert groups of the European Commission, such as Microbull, Micro-HE, and the ECOE project. Number three, the recognition of prior learning, be it formal, non-formal, or informal, of both academic knowledge and professional experience. Number four, student and staff mobility and their opportunities created by the new Erasmus Plus program in both its physical and virtual modes, or a combination of both, for both degree on-campus students and lifelong learners. Number five, this conference will also keep track with the latest developments in the digitalization of on-campus education and its different forms, enhancing its emergency pedagogies during the crisis. Number six, innovation through educational technologies as the promises of artificial intelligence, supporting teaching and learning processes, improving learning analytics, and offering solutions for e-assessment. Number seven, the role of staff support services, helping staff and course program teams in implementing new pedagogies, educational technologies, and international cooperation and mobility. All of these topics will have a major impact on higher education institutions, their leadership, and their staff. Universities are building completely new ecosystems that will enable intensive digital education, interaction in small groups, and last but not least, flexible, inclusive access for all students. In the coming years, we will also see a growing focus on continuing education and professional development, stimulated by European and national policies on micro-credentials. The conference will show that several institutions and governments are already anticipating this policy, which is very promising for lifelong learning in all member states and in all institutions. The European pedagogical landscape has never changed so much and so quickly. Hence, the ambition of this conference to contribute to medium and long-term strategies leading to higher education, which offers at the same time excellent and inclusive provisions. This must be the real hallmark of European higher education. I'm very confident that the aims of this conference will be fully achieved. Thank you very much. Now it's my pleasure to introduce to Pier Paolo Limone, the rector of the University of Foggia, and who is actually our host. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's really a pleasure to have you all here. This conference is organized, of course, by I-HE2021 with a partnership from the University of Bari and the University of Foggia. My colleague, the rector of the University of Bari, will join us soon for a welcome address. And I'm very happy as rector of the University of Foggia to welcome you all here in Puglia, in our region. I'm especially honored to welcome our distinguished speakers and the keynote speakers and the chairs. This is a tremendous year in Italy. We are recovering from the COVID pandemic, and the government has decided to invest heavily on university, heavily on innovation in teaching and learning, In the next few months, we will be competing for around 10 billion euros of competitive calls for university, and some of them will be addressing issues that are relevant to this conference. Also, in terms of internationalization, in learning, transnational partnership with industries. So the theme you are discussing today are extremely relevant, not just for this academic contest, but for the economies of our countries. In Italy, we are now also working on reforming the higher education system with new rules of quality assurance, new rules for the tenure track system for professorship, and we're working on an innovative track for PhD related to the public administration and the industry. All these segments will be again somehow addressed in the lectures, in the papers, in the keynote address that will be offered during these 3 days here in Bari. So I'm very happy once again to welcome you all here in this university, and since Bari is a very nice city, I hope you will have time also to enjoy the beauty of this town, not simply just the interesting networking and scientific elements of this conference. So welcome.
Thank you very much, Pier Paolo, for your hospitality. And let me just advance that there have been some changes in the program, and as a result, I will deliver my presidential address, and then we will have the two keynote sessions. All right, in my presidential address, I would like to share with you some of the issues that EADTU is involved. And the first one is professionalization of digital higher education. The corona crisis has radically changed higher education. And during this period, all institutions established massive support for organizing online lectures, tutorials, and video conferences with different pedagogical approaches. Emergency decisions were taken at all levels. By simply doing, higher education institutions have learned to appreciate the potential of digital higher education. And now, higher digital education is here to stay. But higher education institutions also feel the need for professionalization and the creation of the necessary support structures and the frameworks to achieve the quality of education. After some field research, the European Commission has highlighted this need and launched a call to promote readiness for digital higher education. In response, EADTU partners have joined forces in a strategic partnership for the professional development of digital education. The Digital Pro program is a case, or is a good example of what I'm saying. This program brings together excellent expert schools known for their research and innovation in digital teaching and learning and for developing good practices. On November 18th, 2021, the partnership will launch 3 CPD courses for education professionals on key pedagogical approaches in post-corona digital higher education: synchronous, hybrid education, blended education, and online distance learning, respectively. Each of these courses will focus on student readiness for digital learning. These courses will be based on the latest research and innovations and will present models, guidelines, and pedagogies leading to mature and high-quality education. EADTU is also developing guidelines for digital higher education for the Bloom Hub in the context of the European Commission's Digital Education Action Plan. But moreover, micro-credentials occupy a prominent place in the ADTU working agenda. Since 2016, EADTU partner universities have been concerned about many other students not wanting to study a full course and falling behind. Members also noted a growing need in the economy and society for shorter programs, targeting a specific set of competencies. That's why they have chosen together to develop more short learning programs for online continuing education and professional development, next to degree education or integrated in degree education as stackable modules. These short learning programs should focus on the shorter time horizon of learners at work and the needs of the economy in society. In the further conceptualization of this concept, with the support of the European Commission, short learning programs consist of a set of courses covering a coherent set of competences in a particular field of study with a total size of 5 to 30 ECTS at EQF levels 5, 6, 7, and even 8, which is, as you know, the doctoral level. Partly in parallel with this development, the European MOOC Consortium, consisting of the main European MOOC platforms, has developed standards for common micro-credential frameworks for MOOC-based programs. CMF micro-credentials consist of a coherent set of MOOCs, have a size of 4 to 6 ECTS, and again are linked to EQF level of 5, 6, 7, or A levels. Since 2018, also the European Commission has stimulated the discussion on micro-credentials. In 2018, the Commission identified micro-credentials as a key issue in the Digital Education Action Plan, notably as flexible, accessible learning opportunities for adult learners and professionals, helping them to re-skill, upskill, or change careers after a short learning period of time. The Commission accelerated this development through a consultation group of micro-credentials in higher education. I refer you to the 2021 report, followed by wide consultations of all stakeholders. At the same time, the Microbull project linked micro-credentials to Bologna's key commitments. Again, I refer you to the 2020 report, and will present a first framework early next year. Evidently, it's going fast now, and the European Commission will launch a recommendation to the Council of Ministers on micro-credentials by the end of 2021, and will develop a 2025 micro-credential plan to be integrated into the European higher education area. This means that the recognition of micro-credential qualifications in the broader framework of the European higher education area from 2022 to 2025 will be discussed in all member states. Our members are ready for this discussion, and for 3 years, EADTU members have worked on a project on short learning programs. They have elaborated their ambitions in the field of micro-credentials into concrete action plans. The main next question concerns the qualifications to be awarded for micro-credentials, understandable to learners, academia, and employers. I'm convinced that micro-credentials will be a springboard for universities to develop a full-fledged area of continuing education and professional development. To develop such strategies, business models need to be developed in conjunction with national funding schemes that are affordable both for individual learners and for groups of learners in companies. The European Commission, national governments, and higher education institutions need to be jointly aware of the strategic importance of these developments in the perspective of lifelong learning. This contributes directly to the transformation of the European university agenda of the European Commission, of which lifelong learning is a vital part. Academic collaboration and mobility is a further issue we cannot underestimate. EADTU welcomes the new Erasmus Plus program of the European Commission. And by integrating digital education and mobility, it lays a new foundation for academic collaboration and mobility for all, in a double sense. By digital offerings and blended mobility, all students on campus can benefit from an international academic experience. And two, also, lifelong learners can benefit from an international learning experience. Most European university alliances are setting new standards for mobility, up to 50% and even more. And in combination with blended mobility, this is realistic and effective. For lifelong learners, mixed mobility and short, intensive programs are an opportunity to add a European dimension to the courses and programs. Education is becoming more and more a reflection of society, where people increasingly work in an international context and in virtual networks. This evidently requires new skills. EADTU will take initiatives for this specific group of lifelong learners in collaboration with the deans of faculties that offer open and distance learning. But diversity and inclusion is a hot topic within EADTU working agenda, as you know. Based on the mission, open and distance learning universities have always embraced the principle of equality in education. All have built up a lot of experience and expertise in the field of diversity and inclusion. Recently, EADTU established a task force diversity and inclusion to explore current challenges and share solutions on a variety of topics: gender, migrants and ethnicity, specific learning disabilities, prisoners, athlete performers, army personnel, and privileged groups, etc., and digital accessibility. In many cases, digital solutions can support diversity and inclusion policies. The report of the Task Force Diversity and Inclusion is expected in the spring of 2022. We also pay special attention to the recognition of prior learning and experience. And this recognition is very important for learners who wish to valorize what has been learned from the past in higher education or in the workplace when starting a continuing education or professional development program. For example, a micro-credential program or a degree program. Since institutions are fully competent for this recognition, they can learn from each other's practices. From a talent development perspective, it is very important to suggest alternative learning pathways to students in case they do not meet all the requirements for a recognition. Talent should not be lost, but be upgraded. And talking about network activities, for the past decades, since 1987, I would say, EADTU members have worked on issues critical to the development of digital higher education and lifelong learning. We share this knowledge and expertise through monthly webinar weeks in our Empower program. The next one will be on micro-credentials on November 16th and 19th. We also organize national and local seminars in the membership, 6 locations per year on topics of interest locally or nationally, and consultation meetings for other organizations under request. Together with the Digital Pro courses, this is a significant effort for the continuing professional development of university staff and contributes to the medium and long-term strategies of universities. We also contribute to European Commission's consultation groups on digital education, micro-credentials, and the transformation of the European university. At a global level, EADTU is the point of contact for quality assurance in digital higher education for ICDE, the global organization for online and distance learning. We also participate in UNESCO meetings and publications. From a global perspective, we are aware that EADTU and all higher education institutions can benefit from the support of the European Commission, which puts us in a rather more favorable situation than other continents. It enables us in many ways to lead the way in higher education policies and practices. It is of great importance that the Commission, together with the Council of Ministers, can continue and strengthen its actions in the field of education and the European area of higher education. In this regard, we also welcome the steps towards in the Bologna process regarding digital higher education and micro-credentials. In the European University of the future, in tomorrow's society, lifelong learning takes on a much more important place as careers lengthen and upskilling and reskilling are needed to stimulate innovation and create an inclusive society. Lifelong learning will be organized in interaction with innovation networks, with competence centers and communities, in public services, sectors and companies, with smart regions. Digital education will provide tools for high quality, accessible, and scalable educational provisions for everyone, in emergency situations and beyond. EADTU members continue to support universities and policymakers, sharing the best digital education expertise and experience with all institutions. All in all, I'm convinced that many of the topics I touch upon in my presidential address will be dealt with in this conference by great experts in plenary and in parallel sessions. Thank you very much for joining us, and I wish you the best in this conference. Now, as I said, we will begin with the first session. I'd really like to, with Magali Soenen, please. Yeah, it's my pleasure to introduce Magali Soenen, Police Advisor in the Higher Education at the Flemish Government. Magali will be speaking about micro-credentials in the Bologna process, which is, in fact, one of the issues, at stake within EADTU. Magali, please, you can take the floor.
Thank you very much for inviting me here, and it's my pleasure to give here a keynote on this topic, on how micro-credentials are being taken up by the Bologna process in the past couple of years, and how it will also be taken on further in the coming years. Yes, let's see, okay. Before going really into the Bologna process and into the European higher education area, I wanted to focus in my presentation also a little bit on what is happening at EU level. And in the previous speech, our president has already mentioned some of these initiatives that have been going on in the past year within the Commission. So it's not only in the European higher education area, but also at EU level that this topic of micro-credentials is very high on the policy agenda. And it's a joint initiative taken up by two commissioners, Commissioner Gabriel and Commissioner Schmidt. And as already mentioned, it's embedded in the skills agenda, in the digital education action plan, in the European education area. And all these different documents, all these different processes are gathered together in this higher education transformation agenda of the European Commission. As mentioned, the Commission has set up within higher education a consultation group last year with representatives of higher education institutions, quality assurance agencies, stakeholder organizations, of course European University Alliances themselves as well, and national authorities. So I had the privilege also to represent Flanders as national authority in this group. And with this group, with many experts in this group, we worked on the topic of micro-credentials. with the aim to develop a proposal for a common definition and for some recommendations for a European approach towards micro-credentials. So this group has presented its report in December 2020, and it's freely available for all of you if you want to have a look in there. So this consultation group has set a draft definition of what a micro-credential is or could be, and also an EU standard. What I call the EU standard is a little bit what I call a diploma supplement of a micro-credential. Because when you have a degree, a diploma in higher education, you have the diploma supplement explaining the degree, giving some extra information. And that's also what the EU proposed for a micro-credential with this EU standard. So they mention different topics, different indicators on the learning outcomes, on the provider, on the micro-credential itself, on the topic, etc., explaining what the micro-credential is really about. So this is something that you can have a look at in this report. And as mentioned by the previous speaker, in 2021 there has been a large consultation on the topic of micro-credentials, and all these input is now gathered together by the Commission as input for the Council recommendation, which is foreseen in December 2021. Now let's move on from EU level to EHEA level, European Higher Education Area, comprising of 49 countries, European countries. And then I would like to explain to you about the Microbull project. The name has been mentioned here several times already today. In this project, we have tried to link micro-credentials to the Bologna key commitments. And the Bologna key commitments, there are three. So there is quality assurance, recognition, and qualification frameworks and ECTS. So we mainly have looked at these three topics in our project. The project is an Erasmus Plus project, specifically for the to support the implementation of the European Higher Education Area, and it has been running since March 2020. Partners in the project are the Flemish Ministry of Education and Training, but also the Ministry of Education and Culture of Finland, CIMEA, which is the Enigmatic Center of Italy, the European University Association, and ENQA, the European Association for Quality Assurance in Higher Education. And next to these 5 partners in the project, we also had the privilege to work with a number of experts, and George Ubachs from EADTU, we are very glad that he could also be one of the experts cooperating with us in this project. Now, the aim of the project was really to raise awareness among national governments in the EHEA. We saw that a lot of things are developing very fast in the field within higher education institutions, but also in other providers. And we had a feeling that the national governments and legislation were not catching up, or not, at least not in all countries, catching up with these new developments. So we really wanted to put this topic of micro-credentials on the policy agenda within the Bologna process. And of course, we also wanted to check whether the existing Bologna tools, as we all know them, if they were fit for micro-credentials, or if maybe we needed to propose any changes or adaptations at European level. Furthermore, we also wanted to come with some recommendations and create a European framework for micro-credentials to propose to the ministers in the Bologna process. Now, where are we since the beginning of the project? So we started the project performing a desk research, which was also the input for our kickoff conference of the project. And at this kickoff conference, we also started to work in 3 working groups. So 1 working group on each Bologna key commitment. So as you can see, these 3 working groups were rather large. We had about 60 to 70 participants in each of those groups. And representatives within those groups were mainly national governments, but also, for example, people from quality assurance agencies or people from recognition agencies that were nominated by their country to take part in the project. As we had to work with such big groups, and considering COVID times that we weren't able to host any meetings physically, that was of course not so easy with such big groups to gather information from all EHEA countries. So what we did was also perform a survey among the different countries, and I will further in my presentation go more into detail on this. So we had the survey end of last year, beginning of this year, and then we also worked in several meetings within those working groups, really discussing in detail topics on quality assurance, recognition, and so on. Out of this work, with the working groups and the survey, we have come up with recommendations. It's a full set of recommendations that has been published in July of this year. And now we are in the final stage, preparing the framework. To be able to work in this project, we also created in the beginning a working definition of what is a micro-credential, because we are speaking now almost 2 years ago, and there was no really a definition at that time. So as the topic of micro-credential is not only of importance in higher education, and it's so broad, we wanted to narrow down a bit the scope of our work within the project. So we really focused on the higher education context. So how we saw it was a micro-credential is a small volume of learning certified by Credential. And we see here a long definition, but in fact this first sentence is really the definition. What comes afterwards is more the purpose, how it can be used, what it can consist of, etc., how it can be recognized. So we really try to divide it into different parts of the definition, let's say. Throughout the project, it was also a working definition. We further elaborated on this, and we will get back to this also in our final framework. Now let's get to this Microbull survey. So the aim of the survey was really to gain a picture on the state of play of micro-credentials in all these different member states of the European higher education area. And next to that, also to encourage national discussion. Because by asking all those questions to the national governments or to the representatives in our working groups, it also created within the ministries discussion among different departments maybe in the government, between the QA agencies, the ENIC-NARICs and the government. So people started to discuss this also nationally to be able to fill out, to answer to all the questions for their country. 35 out of the 49 countries participated in the survey. And well, we had 3 main sections, let's say, in the survey. So first one was really investigating on the use of micro-credentials. So we wanted to have an overview on where and which micro-credentials were already offered or being developed in the countries, and how are they taken up in legislation, so about regulation of micro-credentials at national level. Now, if we have a first look on countries that offer or are developing micro-credentials, we saw that at that time, so as things are moving very fast, we have to take into account that we asked those 1 year ago to all the countries. So at that time, 21 countries said that they already offered micro-credentials. In 3 countries, they were being developed, and not being developed or not offered yet at that time in 8 countries. But the majority already has an offer of micro-credentials. If we then had a look on how these micro-credentials were organized, we see that it consists of many different kinds of micro-credentials. We always asked the people responding to the survey to refer to the definition that we gave. And then we saw, okay, it can be MOOCs, it can be course units, it can be postgraduate education, all different kinds of titles, of names for these micro-credentials popped up. If we then ask to the countries if they have an official register or a record of micro-credentials, of the courses, of the programs, or of the providers, we see in most countries they don't have a record of micro-credentials on offer, nor do they have a register or overview of providers in their country. Only in a few countries we did see that they had something on national level. Okay, so if we then asked about regulation of micro-credentials at national level, 22 countries said yes, it's allowed to organize micro-credentials. 8 of them, but only 8 of them, had specific regulations on micro-credentials. And 14 said, yeah, it's allowed, but it's like embedded in our general legislation and we don't have any specific regulations for micro-credentials. In 6 countries, it was still under discussion, and 1 country also said, no, institutions should not offer micro-credentials. I hope they changed their mind in the meantime. If we then made the link to digitalization policies at national level, we see that many countries still don't have a policy on digitalization. And 7 countries said, yes, we do have a policy, but micro-credentials are not part of it. So there's certainly some work to do on this combination between micro-credentials and national digitalization policies. And if we have a look at the second section, which is really the application of Bologna tools to micro-credentials, and again, going back to our three Bologna key commitments, if we see for the first one, micro-credentials are included in the national quality assurance procedures. The main answer is no. They are not referred or not included in any QA system in our country, or they are not referred to explicitly, but they implicitly fall under the same QA system as regular degree programs. And only 2 countries mentioned that micro-credentials are explicitly mentioned in the QA system. If we want to have some information on the sources of information on the QA status, then mostly it's through the provider, through the higher education institution. Some through a list of accredited micro-credentials, and the other countries said no sources of information. If we go to the second Bologna key commitment, the recognition, what is the purpose to recognize micro-credentials? Most countries answered that it's to increase the learner's competitiveness in the labor market, but also for academic or further studies, to recognize credits of prior learning. These were the main topics mentioned on this question. If we ask the countries if recognition of micro-credentials was also the case when they are offered by non-higher education providers, then we see a mixed answer. 16 countries say that yes, from higher education institutions and other providers there can be recognition, and 18 countries mentioned that not only micro-credentials offered by higher education institutions can be recognized. So certainly on this part there is also some work still to do in the coming years. Then to the qualification frameworks, if we asked the countries if their national framework is open for micro-credentials, we got a very mixed answer. 10 countries says yes, it's open, but then if we have a closer look, we have a very diverse answer depending on the country. As you can see, it can be level 5, 6, 7, in some other countries only level 6. It really depends on the country. Then, if we have a look at the ECTS, we also get a very mixed answer. A lot of countries say, okay, yes, micro-credentials are expressed in ECTS always, or in some cases, But if we have a closer look, it can really range from 1 ECTS to 70 ECTS or more, depending on the country that is answering. So we see a very diverse picture among these 49 countries. If we go and have a look at stackability of micro-credentials, so adding micro-credentials towards a full degree, if learners can accumulate micro-credentials, 17 countries say yes, and 16 countries say no, they cannot accumulate micro-credentials. So also here, it's a mixed impression that we get from the different countries within the IHE. What type of support is still required by the countries, by the national governments, by the QA agencies? Mainly exchange of practices, peer support, exchanging information, really helping them. They really ask for help on this topic, to work on this topic further in the coming years. Then if we have a look at the challenges in section 3, the biggest challenge to apply the key commitments to micro-credentials is really about the applicability of the tools. So people still want to have further work on this, further discussion, and also here this peer support, this peer exchange on how other countries are doing it. So this is really what comes out as the biggest challenge. So based on the outcomes of the survey and of the work and the discussions that we already had in the working groups, as mentioned in the beginning, we have set a set of recommendations, 34 recommendations on quality assurance, recognition and qualification frameworks and ECTS. The target group of these recommendations are really the countries, the national governments and the stakeholder organizations, but we also sent in these recommendations to the European Commission in the framework of their open consultation. So all the documents that I refer to here in my presentation, they are freely accessible on our webpage of the project, so the desk research, the full survey report, and also these recommendations are available if you want to have a closer look. So for these recommendations, we had some transversal themes, so I'm not going to go through all 34 here, but just through the big themes. So we first set some general topics about the purpose, the added value of micro-credentials, on the definition, the common format, how it relates to legislation and digitalization. We set some recommendations, for example, to produce guidelines for the different actors in the process. And then we split up recommendations on these 3 Bologna key commitments. So, for example, on quality assurance, we gave recommendations on internal and external quality assurance, how micro-credentials can follow the European standards and guidelines for quality assurance, but how to do that in practice, etc. Same for recognition and qualification frameworks and ECTS. We have set several guidelines and work to do for the coming years. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. With these recommendations, what I just said, it's not an end of this project. Well, it's the end of the project, but it's the start of something new. We have come to these recommendations with the working groups, with all the people involved in the project. But now it's time to really start and work on these recommendations, and for each stakeholder, for the institutions, for the governments, for the agencies, etc., to work further with those recommendations. And within the Bologna process, we are going to do this within the Bologna peer support groups. So for each Bologna key commitment, we have a Bologna peer support group, and in the working program of the Bologna process for 2021 to 2024, this topic of micro-credentials will be taken up by each of those Bologna peer support groups. And in these peer support groups, we will further work on these recommendations specifically for QA, recognition and qualification frameworks and ECTS, together with the national governments and the other stakeholder organizations that are in this process. So it's certainly not an end of this project. This project has led to something that can now really start to work in the Bologna process. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Magali. We've got a few minutes for questions. Any question would like to raise? Yes. Any question?
I'm still here for the end of
for
the rest of the conference, so feel free to ask me any questions later on as well.
There's just one question over there. Yeah.
Hi there. Thank you very much for this great presentation. Is there a bigger vision on how higher education will look like in 20 years? I felt, you're changing everything. So from Bologna, we may go somewhere else.
So I'm not sure if I understood your question very clearly. So you're asking about the future of higher education within the Bologna process? Or?
Maybe what you want to change with the micro-credentials, if there is a vision behind the change that micro-credentials will bring.
I don't think, well, I would say not yet at this moment. Because as I said, we started to discuss this now in this project context within the Bologna process. And now we have discussed this within the working groups, but now it's also time to take it up within the structures of the Bologna process, which is these Bologna peer support groups. So it will now go from, let's say, project-based towards really embedded in the Bologna process. So we hope to be able to, towards the Bologna Ministerial Conference in Albania in 2024, to have maybe some paragraph also in the communique of the ministers by then. But that's still something that has to evolve and that has also to be discussed within the Bologna follow-up group, which it has not been there. It has not been there yet. So I think that's work for the coming 3 years.
Thank you very much. Any other question? Yes. Just one over there.
Michael Murphy from the European University Association. Whenever I see the word regulation, I get a shiver down my spine. Because we are in the education sector, we are very conscious of the importance of freedom to innovate. In making your proposals, are you being careful about ensuring that the degree of regulation that you have in mind is only that which is necessary to ensure quality, but can never be used in the future to restrict innovation?
Thank you.
Well, thank you, and I can only agree. It's not our goal to have strict regulations. It's more the goal to make things possible and to give the opportunity to higher education institutions and other providers to offer them, to facilitate it and to offer them a kind of framework in which they can work. That's more the idea. It's not the idea of having strict regulations.
Yes, yes, there is just one question at the back of the room.
I cannot give it to you, Mark. I cannot give it to you.
Mark Brown from Dublin City University. More of a comment than a question, but you feel free to obviously respond. I wanted to pick up on the issue about the vision, because I thought that was a very pertinent question. I think in fairness to the European Commission and the work that you cited, I was a member of that working group that produced the report in December, is the public consultation process that took place from April through to, I think it was June, is part of building that vision, because the last thing you want is a vision that's imposed on the sector. I was also involved in the analysis of the public consultation process, so I have some insights, and there was a huge level of engagement. So I think what we're going to see over the next few months is some of the reports come out from that consultation process, and I don't think the vision is there yet. It's still a conversation that we're having.
Yeah, that's correct. It's still, work in progress, let's say. And what is also important, and why I also started my presentation here with EU level, is that we need this communication between what is happening within EU and this consultation and their definition, etc., their work, and what will be happening also in the European higher education area. And also throughout the time frame of our project, we had regular meetings also with the European Commission to align the processes in these two levels, let's say EU and EHEA level. So that's also important that this is aligned, because of course all EU countries are also in EHEA, but there are a lot of others only in the European higher education area, so it's important that we talk to each other and then exchange there as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Any final question? Just one final question, just right over there.
Yes, thank you, Stefan Wendt, Bifröst University, Iceland. So you've been showing the results of the survey where these micro-credentials offered in Europe, the different approaches, how they are implemented. Have you also made an overview of what is happening in other parts of the world? I mean, we know in North America there's a lot of development, many universities, other institutions have developed things similarly in other parts of the world. Have you considered that, made a comparison, or are you aware of any such activities in that sense?
Well, yes, we did in the desk research report, which is the first part of our project. So there we also took up information of other parts of the world. That's included there. We did not come back to that anymore in a later stage of the project, because we really focused on the Bologna key commitments, which was the main topic of our project.
Mm-hmm. Well, if there are no more questions, thank you very much. Oh, there is just one more, but one very quick question. Thank you.
Deborah Arnold, Deborah Arnold, project manager at ONEJ, the French Digital University for Management and Economics, and coordinator of the ECHO project, which was cited earlier. We have EADTU amongst our valued members. You mentioned, we've got feedback, haven't we, from there? You mentioned some of the needs were in raising awareness of tools and help in using the tools. What was behind that notion of tools? What kind of tools were being talked about in the survey?
Well, it was mainly about the Bologna tools. So, for example, for quality assurance, the tools that we have there are the European standards and guidelines for quality assurance. So, the processes of internal, external quality assurance, taking up micro-credentials in ECAR, the European Quality Assurance Register, etc. So also the Lisbon Recognition Convention. So depending on the topic, all the tools, all of the the things that we are used to work with in higher education. These were the tools that we were investigating.
Yes. Okay, thank you very much, Marlene, for... Okay, yes, okay, thanks a lot. Thank you very much. Before we actually go on with the next speaker, I would like to thank Rector Stefano Brontini, the Rector of the University of Bahrain, who I would like to come to the stage, and please, you can take the floor. Let me just tell you that thank you very much for your hospitality. We are really grateful for that. Thank you, Rector.
It's not important was I speaking now, so, and to say welcome in Bari, in the first. The second thing, I'm sorry for the sun, next time we take note for it. And third, for my friend Pier Paolo, my friend of Perla, and my friend, you? Yeah, I think so. And so, thank you, because I have here a very emotional moment. When I read higher education new normal, I remember March 2 years late. And I was thinking about that was very difficult, the new normal. And have you here with us in presence to talk about the new normal? For my university is an honor, a very big honor. And I think we must say, everybody, sorry for the late, because the question that you push in this year, you began 55 years ago, and now it's impossible to not take some question to everybody. So I want to talk the last thing about the new normal. In my university, the new normal is not the pandemic, it's the new millennium. We are in new millennium, no, Pier Paolo? And to talk about the question, I said before, the relation, are the new normal, is the normal. So I want to say, welcome in Bari. I think we must to learn to everybody. And I am very honored to have you here, and sorry for the sun. Next time, my university take note about it, and you can produce radio area, and so you come back here and the sun light the idea of the new normal life. Thank you very much to be here.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Rector Stefano Brontini. Now I would like to call Professor Michael Murphy. I'm sorry. Now our next speaker is Michael Murphy, President of the European University Association. He will be talking about digital education and the transformation of a university. Michael, you can take the floor.
Thank you very much, President Ricardo and Professor Limone. And dear colleagues, I want to thank all of you in I-HE2021 for your very kind invitation to join you in person, which is a very special privilege, and virtually because I believe some people may be online, which of course is a perfect example of the emerging new university education. Some present, some online, and others enjoying a recording, no doubt, at their leisure. Anywhere, anytime. I have organized my remarks to address first a question that came from the floor earlier, a prediction for Europe's university sector, what it will look like, its role, and the shape of universities. That's the transformation topic. I'll deal with that first, and then make some comments on digitalization, opportunities and challenges as we see them. And I'm very conscious that in making my comments that I'm speaking to an audience, I-HE2021, which for the last 35 years or so has been championing digitalization in higher education. So I may be conveying nothing more than confirmation that the rest of the sector is finally catching up with you. Now, my remarks are based on a document that we published at EUA in February. It's a policy position entitled Universities Without Walls, which is a vision for universities in the next 10 to 15 years. And it emerged from an extensive consultation process that we undertook with over 100 experts from across Europe's universities, colleagues from other continents, some governments, the European Commission, the business sector, and civic sector, inviting them all to imagine what universities need to look like in the next 10 to 15 years to meet societal challenges. And for some of you in the room, just to say, EUA is the organization that represents about 850 universities from 48 of the 49 countries in the EHEA, because San Marino has joined as a country, but not yet as a university. We're expecting that. And we also represent the national rectors' conferences of 33 countries. So the consensus was, and is, that our society in Europe is going through rapid change. The change is accelerating, and universities have to respond to support society in dealing with the obvious things. Environmental sustainability, number one. Climate change that we must face, while at the same time sustaining economic well-being. Not easy. Digitalization and artificial intelligence, particularly affecting the workplace. So a big challenge for all of us is to imagine the new workplace, the new civic space, and how we provide students with the skills to robot-proof them, to prepare them to compete with artificial intelligence, among other things. We also have to cope as a sector with demographic shifts. In many countries, there's a declining birth rate. In others, the population at university, traditional university age, is increasing, and migration impacts most countries, including migration of refugees. We must cope with societal polarization, often fueled by misinformation from social media, but which is certainly destabilizing democracies, and no country is immune. We have to, in universities, address the consequences of global geopolitical realignment, which right now is undermining cooperation when collaboration across the globe is most needed. So we're watching the USA and China playing out for economic and political power, and Europe and its universities in supporting Europe will have to modulate that competition and earn that role. The pandemic, of course, has dramatically accelerated change across the whole of society, not least driving today's topic, digitalization in the university sector. And for a few of us in the northwest of Europe, Brexit is really important. For those of you elsewhere, it probably isn't, except that it has cast doubt on European political stability. So that's the background under which universities have to evolve, because our role in supporting society to address these challenges is absolutely critical. Now, we chose the title, Universities Without Walls, to symbolize the philosophy of lying behind the themes of the vision. So there's a consensus. This was consulted widely. The National Rectors' Conferences of 33 countries have signed up to this, and this is a shared view. So the first commitment is that universities must be much more open. That's a word you well recognize. Transformative and more engaged in society, and greatly transnational. So we conclude at last that there should not be ivory towers, that we will have blended campuses, traditional learning on campus combined with online. And this is the only way we can address the lifelong learning challenge that has been mentioned here several times, and I will return to it. It is also accepted that students must learn more in the workplace. When we talk about students, we're talking about the traditional undergraduate and early postgraduate students. Experiential learning will be critical, not just in business, but in civic, social, and cultural spaces. And universities see staff moving in both directions between them to ensure that the course content is always up to date, and students will better address real-world problem solving, creative thinking, interpersonal skill development, answering Joseph Aoun's challenge in his book. You may have seen his very good book of 3 or 4 years ago, Robot Proof, How We Have to Evolve in the Age of Artificial Intelligence. This is being adopted. Third point, the curriculum design must involve societal stakeholders to ensure that it's fit for purpose. And external advisory boards, which are common in universities at present, and even in individual schools and faculties, they have to be meaningful, not just window dressing, which is more commonly the case today. We also say that our institutions will have to be deeply embedded in our regions, working with society, with business and industry and civic bodies. And universities have a critical role in driving regional innovation, whether it's economic, business, public policy, or whatever. And we have to partner with leaders in all of these domains to shape our regional economies. I'm sure Sophia Eriksson-Waterschut would have said earlier that universities must be deeply networked within countries, across borders, and beyond in the wider world. And we have to plan for our students, our staff and researchers moving freely between institutions for joint degrees, for research. And we have to get used to the concept of citizens designing their own learning portfolios, moving between institutions and acquiring micro-credentials. Who would have expected that subject to precede my talk? Universities will have to increase international collaborations for another purpose, and that is to drive transnational solidarity within Europe so that all parts of Europe succeed. And the alliances are currently piloting models that should be applicable across the continent and open ultimately to all universities in Europe. This demands a whole range of new academic and financial governance models to oversee a much more porous, interconnected university sector. Beyond Europe, we have to be committed to global sustainability and diversity. I welcome your working group on access and diversity, Ricardo. Our overarching goal in our institutions is to support society to attain the UN SDGs, and sustainable development must be the objective across all university missions, whether that's education, research, innovation, culture. Our institutions must be exemplars, role models for the rest of society in embracing green and sustainable practices. So we have to make sure that our curriculum content is SDG informed, and we must research solutions to SDG challenges in a sustainable fashion. We've committed to universities across Europe being diverse in mission, because diversity is a strength of Europe and of our higher education system. And very importantly, all universities must be valued equally. Strong regional universities are every bit as important as those that are prominent and research intensive. And I'm sure I could extend that analogy further to some institutions specializing as you are today. And lastly, the universities must embrace diversity in their community composition, because our community of students and learning must mirror the diversity of society. We then turn to the key missions of institutions, and firstly to learning, because it's no longer the preserve of 18 to 23-year-olds. It has to take place over a lifetime, full-time at certain times, but more often meshed into work and leisure. So it must be available to all segments of society, SDG-proofed, and it will demand unprecedented flexibilities in program delivery and assessment, not least the integration of micro-credentials. We will be treating our learners as co-creators of understanding, not as sponges of established facts. We will be focusing on interpretation and application of knowledge. And learning analytics will enable bespoke, student-focused learning across the system. We anticipate research and innovation evolving. Much bigger emphasis on a healthier research culture, on ethics and integrity in research to grow and sustain trust. We gained a lot from the pandemic in this regard, in growth in credibility of science, and we must be careful now to protect those gains. That will be done partly through transparency, through open science, publishing openly, storing research data in accessible repositories, growing trust. We must also be committed to the sustainability of research and ensure that research careers, young people especially, will remain attracted to research through better terms and conditions. And we must support our young researchers in diversifying their career ambitions, because the fact is only 10% will ever get a job in academia, though currently most aspire to such. 90% will not, and we have to prepare them for diverse roles in life. In all aspects of research and learning, we must focus on interdisciplinarity, and particularly combining the humanities and the sciences. Hopefully, the European research area, which is being reinvigorated, will facilitate better coordinated research strategies across Europe, better public investment to meet our Lisbon targets, and encourage mobility of researchers across the continent. And finally, we have comments on the third mission and how that will evolve. I've mentioned engagement with the business, economy, and civic regional society, but we're also making a point that we do need to be more actively engaged in political discourse to increase our effectiveness in underpinning public policy. And in our own institutions, it was absolutely essential that there is wide societal engagement in the governance of our institutions overall and in the schools and faculties within, because only through that engagement will we grow public understanding of universities, their role in society, and with that understanding, we may see growth in a willingness to invest with us. So this is the view of the official view of the rectors' conferences with regard to evolution of universities. Now you will say that many of these things are not new, and if you are saying that, that's good. But unfortunately, there are wide gaps across Europe between that vision and what's actually happening on the ground. So we went on to say a little bit about the factors that will determine our success in implementing a vision or in transforming what we do. We obviously recognize the power of governments, the importance of regulations, few but good, the importance of investment, and the protection of academic freedom and institutional autonomy. They're all important enablers of higher education success. But we have also provided guidance to universities on the need for strong leadership, if there is to be this change, on reforms in academic assessment and reforms in career assessment. Because if the incentives for staff and students are not aligned with the vision, then change will not happen. And we will not be able to demonstrate accountability to society as we need to. On that point I'll depart from my script here for 1 second. In our consultation process, twice as many interviewees focused on learning and teaching as did on research. And in an earlier exercise in 2019, when EUA re-examined its own strategy for the future, we had 600 submissions from universities across Europe. And the key message that came through was that we must restore parity of esteem for learning and teaching with research. And that is why we are currently very active with the Commission on creating the conditions for reform of academic careers in Europe, restoring that parity. I haven't mentioned technology yet. I'm in the final straight. Key enabler, of course, is the appropriate use of technology in every aspect of our missions, supporting greening of campuses, cost and energy effectiveness of university administration, virtual internationalization, but above all, democratizing learning and research. And we would see the pandemic as having been a game changer. There will be efforts to go back, but they must not succeed. Probably will not. We conducted a survey in spring 2020, before the pandemic, Europe-wide, on digital education in universities. And we compared those data with 2013, some 7 years earlier. So pre-COVID, we got 370 responses from across Europe, and we learned some messages. 8 years ago, most universities were employing digital formats to some degree in teaching and learning, but it was patchy, exploratory, and not linked to institutional strategies. 7 years later, pre-COVID 2020, the numbers employing digital learning had not changed in 7 years. But there was a difference in that it was more purpose-bound, more strategic, and more mainstreamed. Last year, pre-COVID, some programs employed blended learning in about 75% of universities. No change from 2013. About 40% of universities provided some fully online programs pre-COVID, unchanged from 2013, with great variation, by the way. Fully online programs are found within about 60% of Northern European institutions, compared with, say, 25% in the Western Balkans. Pre-COVID, about 40% of Europe's universities employed some MOOCs, unchanged from 2013. So the key point being, the survey showed very slow progress in employing digitalization across the mainstream institutions. And then COVID happened, and emergency remote teaching became the norm. Chalk and talk did not have to be the future of learning. While at the same time, of course, most agree that emergency remote teaching falls far short in quality compared with properly designed, professionally delivered online learning. But the resistance to change has been broken. We conducted another survey with the International Association of Universities in early autumn this year, and now we can see that 90+% of universities in the I-HE offer remote learning and teaching. And about almost 90% had invested in technology and staff training. That was notable because we already had seen that only a third of institutions pre-COVID had actually trained the majority of their staff. So we have a new commitment to blended learning, lifelong learning, virtual internationalization, green higher education. And we now accept that they will be attained only through digital learning. But you know better than most that there are challenges to be overcome. The pandemic demonstrated, highlighted the need for investment in digital infrastructure, not just within universities, but across society within Europe, so that people can actually access what is made available. The inequalities in internet, Wi-Fi, and smart devices across Europe was dramatically underlined. We need educational digital platforms that comply with common global standards. For virtual internationalization, that will be critical, and done best in partnership with the private sector. At this moment, we are at EUA involved in a project to bring the major global associations to a common forum. I'm speaking here of the associations that represent continents or subcontinents. And I'm happy to say that we will have our first virtual meeting in 4 weeks' time. We hope to see this as a platform by which we can address the matters of common standards, common practices that we so sorely will need, and supporting what you're doing. We also recognize the extensive investment in staff training that is needed. We need security of infrastructure, immune to cyber attack. I mentioned earlier to George that the university at which he spoke prominently at EUA conference some years ago is currently paralyzed, totally paralyzed by a cyber attack. That has to be addressed. Verification and validation, detection of fraud, plagiarism remain a severe challenge, but will have to be addressed. And the academic governance and definition of intellectual property rights will have to be updated. There is a very good article in this week's World University News, which is taken from South African Journal of Higher Education about a month ago, on the challenges that remain facing us in embracing digital to the degree we need to do. It's by Rianne Rudman, who may be known to some of you, and it is a wonderful outline of the areas where solutions are urgent and where failure is not an option. My final remark is that the European Learning and Teaching Forum in recent years has shown us the value of peer support in embracing innovation. And this year, the theme of the forum, being held in Bilbao, is On-Site, Online, On Point. It's organized by EUA, so this is a barefaced advertisement, Ricardo, for which I won't apologize. But can I say to you in EADTU that you have been pioneers in this space over many years, and you have a lot of learning to share with universities that very suddenly have come on board for good reasons. I ask you to be generous in sharing your experiences. Otherwise, Universities Without Walls, the vision for the future, will not be attained. We just have to work together. Thank you. There are my remarks to the topic. I'd be happy to take questions and any incoming fire. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Michael, for this really, really nice talk. We've got a few minutes, not many, a few minutes for questions. So anyone would like to raise any question?
No, nothing worse than having said it all.
Yes, any question? Yes.
Can I ask you to define SDG informed a little more? Like, you mean in terms of the curriculum or in terms of the policy of the university?
My hearing aid is not working well enough.
No,
Did you get
no,
that, Ricardo?
I didn't get that either.
Okay, try again. So I wanted to ask you about SDG informed.
Yes.
Do you mean in terms of the curriculum of each university or in terms of the university policy?
All of the above. Curriculum reform. Now, interestingly, in our survey with IAU, we asked the question whether the pandemic and the need to go to digital platforms had changed curriculum content. And only in 50% of cases, roughly, had reform of curriculum been deemed necessary. We didn't go into detail on which programs and what changes in the other half. But at the end of the day, our curriculum has to address the SDGs broadly, not any single SDG, because we have to educate people to live in a changed world with new skills to contribute to changing that world and to adapting to life within it. So there is a fundamental change taking place and must take place further, both in the content, how it's delivered, and of course, naturally, the governance and policy surrounding academic endeavors. A lot of work.
Thank you. Just one more question, as we are on time. Yes, Pier Paolo.
Rector Paolo. We have many joint common members.
Okay. Thank you for your very interesting speech. You addressed many societal challenges, and I'm wondering if, from your observatory, you are watching some closer connection from governments and universities. At least in Italy, I have noticed that in the last 2 years, there is from the government much stronger awareness of the role of the university in society. So universities, through the Rectors' Conference, have been involved in the new government policies for the rest of the country. How is it going in the rest of Europe? Are universities much more involved or not?
I think there's a greater appreciation, Paolo, in government of the importance of science to underpin public policy. Far from perfect, but it is much greater than it was pre-pandemic because, as you know, our virologists and our vaccine specialists and our epidemiologists, sociologists, psychologists all played a big part in enabling governments to manage. Has it changed the fundamental relationship between governments and the university sector? I would say, like all biological or human attributes across Europe, it is normally distributed. Some governments remain as deaf as ever, beyond saying thank you for the help when it comes to regulatory reform, investment, or whatever. I'm very pleased to hear that initially I heard figures like 30 billion euros and so on. I would have to put you at the top of the good end of the class in that regard, but we await the evidence of a sustained positive change in the relationship. Some countries, yes, some countries still deaf. Italy sounds good.
Yeah. All right, I don't know if there is any remaining question. If not, we are on time. Thank you very much, Michael. It has been a pleasure, and no doubt I-HE2021 members will be very willing to collaborate. No doubt about that. Thank you very much.
Much appreciated. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Now, we are just continuing the session. However, Liz Mark will be chairing it. Liz, you can.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Sorry for that slight hiatus. Well, having made a slight tweak to the programme, I was just checking that I've got everything in the right order. Those of you who don't know me, I'm Liz Marr from the Open University in the UK and Vice President of I-HE2021, and it's so lovely to be here again in person. So missed it last year, and so it's just really glorious to be here. And of course, it's not raining as much as it is in the UK, so lots of benefits. We're going to take 3 of the speakers before the tea break. We have to have the tea break on time, and then we'll move on to the final speaker after the tea break, and then we'll go into the panel reflection session. So I'd like to invite Josie Froser, Deputy Vice Chancellor at the Open University UK, and my boss. So, so I've got to let her have as long as she likes. Do you want to here? Yeah? Or okay. You've got your place behind. And
right. Okay. Thank you very much, Liz. It's really, really dangerous to tell me that I've got as long as I like, but I will attempt to not talk for Britain and just talk for the OU, maybe. So I was asked to talk about the impact of the COVID crisis on students and institutions, and I've tried to take a fairly wide view on the question, while also trying to illustrate it with some anecdotes from what we've been doing at the OU and what colleagues around the sector have been talking about in university exec teams over the last couple of years. And I think there's some really interesting things that are emerging. So this is a sort of fairly personal set of reflections, given the 20-minute time frame. There were probably a lot of other directions that we could have gone with this title, but I thought it would be interesting to see where we got to. And I've tried to keep the key question in mind, is what have we learned from managing through this pandemic, this crisis? So I'm going to try and talk about a few different things. I think it's undeniable that COVID has accelerated the take-up of remote and digital learning, and it's great to be in this particular sequence of speakers, because I think we've just had that really well illustrated by colleagues who've gone before me. I think it's also worth highlighting that COVID has enhanced and intensified governmental and societal focus on the need for a change in skills and the need for lifelong learning, reskilling and upskilling as economies are shocked and reshaped. And I think closer to home, thinking about what we've done in our institutions, we've made a lot of emergency changes. They were essential, they were done in the moment, especially in universities in the more conventional face-to-face sector. But how are we evaluating the impact? What happened? And what can we learn from that to bring us towards the new normal that the conference this week is all about? I'm going to talk a very little bit about our student reactions at the OU and information from conversations I have with colleagues around the sector, and how their expectations and experiences are a risk and an opportunity for distance teaching organisations like I-HE2021 members. And I'm going to try and think a little bit at the end about where next. And my hypothesis there is that actually recovery and defining the new normal is probably harder work for university management than managing the crisis in the first place. So let me get started on that first topic. We were already seeing changes before the pandemic, I think. Really interesting to hear some of the statistics from the Rectors' Conference that we were just presented with. This is some US data, and you can see from 2012 to 2019 on the graph there that the percentage of students who were doing at least some distance education, and this is all students in all degree awarding institutions in the US, there was a significant rise in the uptake of online courses. Even in campus universities, there is evidence, if you take a subset of these data, you can see that in some quite prominent campus universities where students are paying a large fee to go and have a campus experience, something like in the last few years before COVID, 60 to 80% of students on some of those campuses would take at least one online course, presumably sitting in their dorm room or hall of residence or student accommodation. So students have already been voting with their feet and moving towards online, even in the conventional sector. And we were also seeing changes pre-pandemic in more focus on digital learning experiences. It was patchy, but there was an expectation that every university would have some kind of virtual learning environment, that students might have an app that helped them get to lectures, that there would be digital tools that could help with assessment, etc. Even if it was just PowerPoint being on a VLE, that was becoming a mainstream expectation pre-pandemic. And then with COVID, everyone became a distance learner. As our campuses shut down, as different countries went into lockdown, our competitor institutions, if you want to call them that, our campus traditional sector universities really did leap forward. They had no choice. And I think even some of our distance teaching organisations, where we would like to think we are all quite technology savvy, developed quite rapidly new strategies for digital meetings, meetings at a distance, delivering things that we could never have envisaged doing online, we did do online. So I think COVID has accelerated the use of digital, but I wonder if it will stick. And I'm slightly reassured by the remarks earlier, but I also see when I talk to colleagues in the traditional campus sector that there is a lot of emphasis on getting back to face-to-face, getting students back in a physical laboratory, in a lecture theatre, albeit with masks and social distancing, there is still a feeling that campus-based universities will go back to campus experiences. But I do think some of the digital developments, especially those in assessment, will continue across the sector. And I think this is a risk and an opportunity for us. So there's no doubt that the skills gap, the second topic I wanted to focus on, is an emerging challenge. This is some data from a UK government report that came out last year. There's over 200,000 roles in the UK. This is just data skills, nothing else, that require that level and that focus of skill, and there's over 178,000 roles advertised at the time of the report where businesses were struggling to recruit. The bar graph at the bottom is based on a survey of businesses who've needed a data role and have struggled to recruit it. And in large companies, 55% of those companies said they had had data roles that they couldn't fill. So we're getting skills gaps that were around pre-pandemic, and we're also getting now an enhanced shift and a rapidity of shift in how people want to respond to skills in economies where lots of jobs have disappeared, lots of people have realised their industry is massively affected, people have been furloughed from work, stood down from work, and the skills gap is evolving in a new and accelerated way thanks to COVID-19. I wanted to talk about micro-credentials because I think they are an example where I-HE2021 universities have had massive impact in raising appreciation and understanding of how we can deliver skills that respond to the pandemic, that respond to skills gaps, that respond to societal challenges. And I'd like to think that universities like those represented in this room are at the forefront of this shift, but we won't be the only people doing this. These are a couple of examples of recent micro-credentials or developing micro-credentials from the OU, and we build our micro-credentials with FutureLearn, which is one of the platforms, the European-based platforms, that has really focused on developing short courses, online, mobile-friendly, do it from anywhere, do it at any time courses with lots of different partners. I picked a couple out here that I thought were interesting for some of the themes that I know all of us are interested in. So equality, diversity and inclusion is a really important topic for all of our organisations, and we've recently created a micro-credential, a 6-hour short course, really, called Union Black, about black culture in Britain and how universities, this is free to university staff and students across the UK sector, can develop an anti-racist attitude and change systemic racism. The other one that I've picked, which doesn't start till March, so you've still got loads of time to sign up, is our micro-credential that's being created at the moment around exploring how Cuba delivers low-cost, low-tech innovation and applying those techniques to tackling the climate crisis in a way that is effective. And I think that's going to be a really interesting example of a micro-credential. We've been focused about skills in lots of different ways. So these two examples illustrate, I think, some of our social mission as a university. But we've also been looking at taster courses. We've been working with other universities to look at the digital skills gap, doing coding boot camps, women in tech events, conversion masters, mainstream degrees for things like artificial intelligence and so on. And we've also been producing lots of free short taster courses so that anyone who finds themselves or found themselves with downtime in the pandemic could have a go at a part of a module and consider whether this was for them, for pleasure, for interest, to see if this was an area where they wanted to retrain, and to feed them into our modules. Those free short taster courses are on our free learning platform, OpenLearn, and the amount of traffic that we had on that platform during COVID and the lockdowns in the UK was absolutely phenomenal. At one point we had 10 times our usual traffic on the platform, with people looking for training and education and something that would keep them stimulated during lockdown. FutureLearn similarly saw massive growth in people looking for courses and looking for education and training that often would address the skills gap. And I think my summary of what we've learned from this very intensive period of building micro-credential short courses and free learning is that it's helpful to focus on your strength areas in your discipline, but not just think in terms of traditional degree-focused, module-focused higher education, but to think more widely. And I don't think it will surprise any EADTU members to know that our most successful micro-credential so far has been ones developed by the great team at the OU in the Institute for Educational Technology to help support people across the sector, including across the campus traditional university sector, to upskill their own ability to develop good quality online materials that engage students. And we've got a whole suite of micro-credentials on FutureLearn that are around the skill of doing really great online teaching. One of the things that came across my desk in this COVID period has been a look at assessment. There's a couple of reports that I've referenced and linked here, which are both from JISC, which is the UK-based association that looks at digital technology in education, further and higher education. And there's a couple of really interesting reports that I would really recommend. So the report in the picture here, Assessment Rebooted, is a set of case studies of all different sorts of British universities, from the highly research intensive to the open and distance learning, because we're in it, to new emerging universities with a more skills and teaching focus. And it's all about what they did to change assessment during the pandemic and what they've learnt from that. It's a really interesting report. It builds on, I think, what a report that came out literally right before the pandemic hit in February 2020, which talked about 5 principles for how we could reboot and improve digital assessment using digital tools. And the report was very focused on us trying to build assessment that's more authentic, more accessible for disabled students, more continuous, so a series of assessments rather than a big endpoint assessment, more secure and automated. And I posted this up, which I won't go into because it's too detailed, but I thought it was an interesting rapid response case study that we did at the OU. We set up a group that would make rapid academic decisions as they arose, change regulations, change processes, change ways of working, deliver rapid training to module teams to update their assessment, move things online, reorganise some of our special circumstances consideration and so on. And the changes that we made, we have identified, reduced some of our awarding gaps. They transformed the outcomes for disabled and black students. They were well received by students in complex life circumstances. Working parents, for example, make up many of our students. And we will now have the challenge of coming back to normal. So I think one of my conclusions would be that evaluating what you've done during COVID is absolutely crucial. What impact did changes have on student performance? What's that telling us about how to make things more equal, more inclusive for the future? In some of our rapid processes, we involved our students significantly. That's been helpful. It caught things that we might not have caught with a group of staff. We need to make sure we're focused on students in our governance. And we know that student and staff well-being has been deeply affected in complex ways by the pandemic. I found it really interesting having a peer group of other exec members from other universities and just bouncing around ideas about what we've done to support student and staff well-being, and hearing what other people have done has been fantastically useful. And part of that listening and engagement is around hearing what will the new normal really look like and what do people want it to look like. Personally, I think changing our ways of working, dealing with an evolving set of staff and student expectations, and thinking about our facilities, our buildings, is going to be really challenging. In the OU, we have varied locations. We're based around the 4 UK nations. England, Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales all have offices. We've had individual staff who have loved working at home and don't ever want to come back to site. We have staff who have absolutely hated working from home and want us all back in the building ASAP. And we have managers who feel very strongly that their team need to be together, and other managers who feel very strongly that their team have managed really well. And so that's having an impact on those team discussions. What does this mean? Will there be different response for people in different roles? How do we make that as fair as we can? It's very easy to envisage a future campus where academic colleagues have massive flexibility, but people who are working at lower grade jobs, perhaps on phone lines supporting students or doing some administrative tasks, feel that their manager tells them when they have to be in and when they don't have to be in. What are we going to do about managing that and creating learning from best practice? It was great to hear the example earlier about how I-HE2021 universities can build on the best practice we have for learning at a distance and share it more widely with the rest of the sector. I think we've probably learnt something ourselves, because while we're often very good at supporting students at a distance, we've had to learn rapidly to support staff and colleagues and their needs at a distance too. And what does it mean for our estates teams and the sustainability of our institutions if the future new normal has university staff that only come in 1 or 2 days a week to their offices, but we are still maintaining large buildings that need heating and cooling and all of the sustainability elements there? So we have to do something that will create innovative spaces to do the work where it's worth coming together. As I hope this week will illustrate, there's still some real value in coming together to network, to meet people physically, to have those conversations face to face. But coming to work is no longer, I think, going to ever be coming to shut yourself in a room from 9 a.m. to 5 a.m. and look at a computer screen for many of our university colleagues. We also have some challenges that have emerged. While students have largely welcomed the changes that we've made and found them engaging and outcomes have been achieved, we also have to think about how difficult it's been for some of our students who have digital poverty. If you have been studying from home with the family laptop, and that's worked pretty well for you when you're not in a pandemic, but suddenly you're in a pandemic and your children are at home and they are trying to do schoolwork and homework on the family laptop, and your partner is at home trying to work on the laptop to do meetings, when is your study time, when is your access happening? How do we demonstrate that we're hearing what was better and what was worse during the pandemic and the changes that we made, and demonstrate that we're responding to that in creating a new normal? So in conclusion, I think what's happened from COVID is that the things that we've all been focused on in our careers for distance and online education are no longer niche institutions, but are absolutely now mainstream. and well understood. That means we have a changing environment for our organisations. And I think there's an opportunity there in that we can demonstrate really good, well-designed, strong pedagogic focused distance teaching, and our colleagues can learn from that. And our prospective students can see that there is a way to do this well. And that's an opportunity for all of us. It's also a risk for us. If you were a campus-based student who went off to a traditional university really excited about what student life was going to be like and found yourself shut in a room watching hour after hour of lectures on a tiny laptop screen that had not been designed for online teaching, my anxiety is that those students now look at our organisations and think that's what we do. That's not what we do. We do something that is a much more engaging and professional digital experience, but how do we express and explain that to those students who might now not consider coming to us for their masters or their higher qualifications? So I think there is an opportunity and a threat in this mainstreaming of our area of expertise. There's no doubt key trends have accelerated. There's no doubt that a focus from governments on rapid retraining, short, quick, is not going to mean funding in many governments for a long part-time extended degree. But it will hopefully mean that we have real opportunities to get government funding for things like micro-credentials, to get employer funding, and to find new ways to deliver great teaching and meet social and economic need. Learning from what worked in our academic regulations and thinking about the equality, diversity and inclusivity of what we did during COVID is another real opportunity. And last but not least, thinking about what our staff need and want and our students' personal circumstances in a way that we've never perhaps had to think about it before, I hope can be something we all take away from the crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Josie, very much. And I don't know whether we've got time for questions just now, but you're coming back on the panel later. So could I suggest that people hold their questions for the panel discussion so that we can just keep to time and get you to your tea break on time. So we'll welcome you back in a moment, Josie. Thank you. I'd now like to invite Annelies Rice from KU Leuven for the first of our... Is Annelies here? Yeah, hi Annelies. For the first of our discussions about education in post-COVID transformation, and Annelies is going to talk about synchronous hybrid education in that context.
I thought it would be first coffee break, no? Before the coffee break?
Oh. Yeah. Yeah, that's fine.
Because I'm so happy to have an audience again after 1 year and a half.
Does it work? Yes. Okay. Like the other presenters, I'm very happy and pleased to be here, to be invited to talk about synchronous hybrid teaching and learning. Okay, and so my name is Annelies Raas. I'm not a policy advisor like many of you, but I'm a senior researcher at I-HE2021, which is an IMEC research group at KU Leuven. And I'm also affiliated to Université de Lille in France as chairholder on learning, technology-enhanced learning spaces. So it's a nice example of a transnational collaboration to work on new learning spaces. I will talk about synchronous hybrid education in post-COVID transformation because KU Leuven is also part of the Digital Pro projects, so a project coordinated by I-HE2021 already mentioned before on continuous professional development courses, and KU Leuven is responsible for the course on synchronous hybrid teaching and learning. And why KU Leuven is responsible for that course is because KU Leuven already invests in research and development on hybrid courses before COVID. So in 2016, we started thinking about the concept of hybrid learning and teaching. And this has led to this room, but I will come back to this later. So in the talk before the coffee break, I hope to answer 3 important questions. So first, I want to tell you more about the why question. Why did KU Leuven invest in synchronous hybrid learning spaces before COVID? What makes the spaces unique compared to other spaces? What are teacher and student experiences? And a third question, probably the most important one, how should we implement synchronous hybrid education? What does research tell us? So the first question, the why question. So I'm a researcher from KU Leuven in Belgium, and what you see here is the northern part of Belgium. And KU Leuven is a multi-campus university, so we have different campuses across 9 cities. Personally, my office is at Kortrijk, so I'm working and living in Kortrijk, but my mother university, Leuven, is located 120 kilometers away. Some programs are organized at the same, for example, teacher education program is organized at all campuses. So we were really thinking about how we can organize the same courses at the same time at the different campuses. But of course, this is only one reason. KU Leuven was already also thinking about how can we organize in a better way continuous lifelong learning programs for working people, etc. And this has led, by means of a research project, but also a project in collaboration with industry partners. A big partner was Barco, a Belgian industry partner. We co-designed this room, and I'm also proud to say that this room has won in 2020 the UNIS Award. UNIS is the European University Information System. We won the award for Best AV-enabled classroom. And what makes this room special, so as you can see, the term hybrid has mentioned already. It means that at the same time we connect on-site students, participants, and at the same time also remote students. As this is also now happening, so I've heard that the talks are streamed, but I cannot see the remote participants. In this case, a teacher can see the remote students as good as the on-site students. And for many teachers, this is the main reason why they like so much this space. So it's the remote students are projected as they are on the last row in the classroom. So they can really teach in a natural way, speak to on-site students, but also to remote students. Regarding the students, this room gives us flexibility to learn not anytime, so it's synchronous hybrid teaching, but anywhere. We give them the choice to come to campus or to follow the course remotely from the place where they live or where they work. On this picture, you can see the setting of a remote student. The system is supported by the WeConnect, so the Barco system, which is a really integrated system. As you can see here, the remote students can choose which viewpoint. He can choose to see the speaker or the lecturer enlarge, but it's also possible to see how you, as a remote participant, is projected in the classroom. And this seems to be a small feature, but it's a very important one, to see that you're really part of the classroom. Here at the right, you see that this is the place where students can chat, ask questions, but also the place where the results of the quizzes and polls are presented. Initially, the idea was that hybrid teaching and learning should be supported by a room controller or a technology navigator, so a person that can mute new participants, can choose where participants should be put on the screens, and answer technical questions. It's also the person that can launch quizzes and polls, because we know, based on research, that launching quizzes and polls is very important for interaction, for stimulating cognitive activation, but many teachers don't do this because they really want to focus on only on teaching, and then a technology navigator can launch the quizzes and polls if a teacher asks a question. So this is the system supporting the quizzes and polls. It supports on-the-fly quizzes and polls. So this means that a teacher does not need to prepare his or her questions in advance, but it can just be launched now during a presentation to collect answers. And on this slide, you can see how the answers are visualized for a teacher. And teachers really love this kind of setting because it gives a lot of feedback, formative assessment, and it gives the input. So we already talked about learning analytics. It's also only a small example of learning analytics, of course, but it gives the feedback for educational decision making. It visualizes if students understand a certain question, if students are not following anymore. But this picture is a picture of a pure virtual setting, not anymore the hybrid setting. But this was the case. We all know that in March 2020, we could not have students anymore at our campuses. So at KU Leuven also, we had to transform all our settings into pure virtual settings. So thanks to the same software within the buildings of EduLab, we were able to transform our collaboration rooms into pure virtual lecture halls. So we had, in 2018, we had 1 hybrid virtual classroom, and in 2020, we had 3 virtual classrooms. If you want to know more about, so there's a publication in Media and Learning that nicely describes how we did this makeover. Luckily, in the start of academic year 2020-21, we could welcome again our students with social distancing, and a lot of students still need to be in quarantine, and we had again the hybrid setting. So this is an example of a teacher that was already very used to the setting, so she did not needed a room controller anymore. She could launch the quizzes herself, and as you can see, the answers are projected on the screens, and this is, so the setting, what remote students can see. Because, as you can see, these rooms are quite small, and we also wanted to create hybrid settings for larger rooms. We created also for the beginning of academic year 2020-21, a hybrid lecture hall. And as you can see here, so the remote students are displayed in front and not anymore at the last row. This is a setting in which not only on-site students and remote students with interactivity are connected, but we also had the remote through live stream possibility. So this is really, we often in literature you also found the multi-access education. So students could access this room through 3 different modes. So this means that at our university, we had a combination of synchronous learning on campus, remote through different settings, and of course we also had the asynchronous option through recordings, but this is not within the scope of this talk. I also promised you to tell you something more about the research. And we started in 2018 with a systematic, 2017 with a systematic review. which is published in Learning Environmental Research. And the main conclusion is that all research is claiming that it is a flexible mode of education, but it's a very challenging one, not only for students, but especially for teachers, because it creates an orchestration load, even overload, because a teacher has to manage both on-site students and remote students at the same time. Based on the systematic review, we also found that research on synchronous hybrid learning is still limited, and most research is qualitative in nature. We are redoing this systematic review in the Digital Pro project, and I can already say you that many more publications have been published in the last 2 years. So because there was limited quantitative research, we did research to really investigate the engagement of students in the different settings, because there are assumptions about this engagement, but what does the research tell us? So we collaborated with a group of 18 years old, so it's 6th year in secondary education. And the same group had 2 sessions of pure face-to-face learning, 2 sessions participating purely virtual, and then we organized 2 sessions in the hybrid learning space, which means one group on-site, another group participating remotely. And then we investigate this by means of multimodal learning analytics. This is also beyond the scope of this talk, but we had a PhD student that investigated how we can use process data to capture engagement. And then usually I ask the audience, what do you think? When are students least motivated? Do you think that there are no significant differences between settings? Do you think students are least motivated in the remote settings, no matter if it's hybrid or not? Or do you think students are least motivated in the remote setting? No, usually it's a poll everywhere, but now this is a PDF. Who of you thinks that it's the first option? You can just raise your hands. Okay. Who thinks it's the second option? The second answer? And then the third option? Okay, some are undecided, as I can see, but yeah, mixed. This is the answer. So the answer is remote students are less motivated in the hybrid setting. So the same students experience a different setting, and we did not find significant differences if they are all face-to-face or all virtual. In the same setting, same teacher, same. But we found a significant difference for remote students if they know that another group is there. We explained this based on social theory, the in and out group feelings, and based on qualitative data, we can always also say that it's, yeah, they are there and I'm alone at home, so this is really a difference in engagement. These results are published in this publication in Computers in Education. We did some smaller experiments in the last academic year to see if we can replicate these findings with our university students, to see indeed the effect on on-site versus remote participation on both conceptual and affective variables by means of a pre-test, post-test intervention study. And it's good to say, I'm happy to say that we did not find significant differences regarding conceptual understanding. So remote students and on-site students have equally learning gains in these settings, but we found significant difference regarding affective variables, which is in line with our previous results. So with lower motivation for remote students compared to on-site students. Yet, if we have a look at the qualitative comments, students indicate that even though I was not physically present, I felt connected to the fellow students. And the reason why they felt connected is because they could see other students. So it's really related to how the classroom was set up. And also related to the type of learning activities. Online discussions, small group discussions was one way to not feeling alone. Also in this setting, we conducted research to investigate the differences in engagement between the different modes of participations. And we could again replicate our previous findings that on-campus students had the highest motivation and the lowest motivation was found for students following remote through live streaming, which means that they could just follow, but a teacher could not see, like some people maybe are now following this session. I'm coming to an end. And we also asked this group of students, about 100 students, what, according to them, was the most determining factor for engagement during Synchronous course. And here you see 3 types of categories. This is based on the activity-centered analysis and design framework by Peter Goodyear and colleagues, stating that an emergent activity will lead to certain outcomes, but this is influenced by 3 types of design. The set design, everything to do with how a space looks like. Which tools do you use? What is the learning space? Do you see this epistemic design? What is the learning activity? What are the tasks a teacher is giving? And social design, everything to do with group learning, individuals, how big are the groups, socially related things. So, and all the answers were categorized based on this framework. And as you can see, it's really a mix. So the answers were really a mix of the different designs. Some people said, seeing the professor and other students is for me the main factor. Others, the most, answered it's what we have to do. If a teacher asks questions, if he really interacts with us. And it doesn't matter if it's by means of polls. It does not have to be personal. It's just the interaction of the teacher that motivates me. And others, the least one, being surrounded by people. We are here, it's a conference on digital learning and teaching, but we prefer to come on site, so sitting together with others in a lecture hall can, for many of us, be motivated. So, these are parts of some research results on synchronous hybrid teaching, but as concluding remarks, I want to stress that in line with the I-HE framework, we found that successful learning and teaching is really interrelated with set, epistemic, and social design decisions. What teachers do in their courses is definitely linked with student engagements, but we also have to be aware that what teachers do and can do is related with where they teach. And I think we are often talking about learning spaces, but we should also talk about teaching space, because this is really connected with each other. And I think this research also shows that being taught from a distance does not necessarily mean that students cannot experience presence, but I think you already know this as a community of distance learning and teaching. Thank you very much, and enjoy your coffee.
Thank you, Annelies. That was great, and I know there will be a lot of questions, but we just don't have the time right now. So we're going to hopefully there is Annelies. You can catch her later with the questions, and there was some really, really interesting learning in that. So thank you. I think we're going to push on with the third presentation in this set before we go for a break. Okay. So Willem van Valkenburg is joining us online, I hope. He's fortunate to be presiding over the bit with the technology in it.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you. We can't see you as yet.
No,
Willem.
I can't enable my video. If someone gives me the permissions to do so.
I think we're nearly there, so if you can just bear with us for a minute. And then we will get the tea break. Willem, can I check if you can hear us okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, Willem, is it okay if we take a coffee break now and then we'll try and fix up the technology connection in the break?
That's fine for me.
Can't hear what you said. Yeah, I think we're just going to do that. Colleagues? Yeah, okay. Colleagues, we're going to take the tea break now while we try to fix the technology connection with Willem, and we'll join him when we come back from tea in half an hour. Okay, so tea break now for half an hour. Thank you.
William, do you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
It's Alessandra. In
Hi.
half an hour we will be back. Is that all right?
Say it again?
4:30.
4, yes.
Sorry, can you repeat to me?
Yeah, 4:30 is fine for me.
Okay, when we are back, please, you should turn on the camera. Can you just try if it works? Just a second, nobody sees you.
No, I don't have permission.
You don't have camera?
It says you can't start your video because the host has
But you
stopped
will
it.
show PowerPoint, something like that?
Let's see.
William?
Yeah, I think I can show my...
Yeah, they are on. Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
But I can't, the people can't see me then.
Yeah, but we see them. Do you manage to then present like that?
Yeah, but I think it's always also good to start off that they can see me.
Oh my God! Everybody is speaking. I don't hear you. Can you please repeat?
It's always good to start that they see my face in the beginning. So that's what I normally start with, first showing my face and then starting the PowerPoint. But if you can give me permission, then
yeah,
I
definitely. We hear you right, and we see you at 4:30. Say again to me, Stefan. At 4:30. Is it right?
Okay.
Hang in there. Thank you a lot, because people are just leaving the room, so nobody will hear you. Okay. We will be back soon. Thank you. Hang in there. Ciao.
All right. Bye.